Why is it critical for you as an individual and America as a nation to remain under God? Do you have any idea of the Christian history involved in the founding of America that influenced our founding fathers? And finally, is God using Donald Trump to reawaken the Christian spirit in America? These are the questions that me and my guest, Mike DiVirgilio, the author of Going Back to Find the Way Forward, Trump, A Great Awakening, and the Refounding of America, talk about in this what I believe to be a critically important conversation. If we believe Christianity is the best way to live that produces the most flourishing and stable individuals and societies, then we must find our way back to it. I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Mike DiVirgilio. All right, Mike. Well, thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Zach.
Yeah, Mike. So you've talked about how it's critical for us to keep America one nation under God and to keep America Christian. You've also said that God is using Donald Trump to do so.
Mhm.
How do you think that is?
Wow, that's a long story because Donald Trump, for maybe the vast majority of people, has been an acquired taste, to say the least. So I'm a boomer, infamously to some, but grew up with Trump. So in the 80s, he was ubiquitous. He was everywhere, and I just, being a Christian, conservative Christian, I despised everything I thought I knew about Trump. I mean, the gaudy, everything was about himself and Trump, Trump, Trump. So when he came down the escalator, I was just, this is a joke. It's like, whatever, he's just a publicity stunt. And then it wasn't. And to see what happened. So how my mind opened up to him, and to answer your question, to get there, is that his enemies spoke so disparagingly of him, like he was the worst human being on earth. And I thought to myself, there's nobody that can be that bad. I mean, he makes Hitler look like a good guy or something. So what really turned me around was his children, seeing that he has children who are adults, who are well-adjusted, and they love and respect their father. I'm thinking, a psychopathic narcissist does not pull that off. Just doesn't happen, right? So Trump and what he stood for wasn't really so much the issue, although he brought these things like immigration, like not forever wars, like the decimation of middle America, and manufacturing, and these things that weren't talked about on the conservative, well, I call it Con Inc. now, it's a con, on the side that I had been on for 35 years. But it was the reaction to Trump. It was that overreaction of just breaking the left, including the Uniparty, because to me, and you'd probably agree, the rhinos are as much, maybe they are more the enemy than the Democrats, because they're the ones that have just always, Steve Bannon, who's one of my heroes, calls them the controlled opposition. And so all along, my first title of the book was going to be Trump, the Great Revealer, because it was almost like, he's a builder, he tears the side off a building, and you see, instead of just, what this or that, you see zillions of now they're escaping my brain, not ants, but termites, that's the word. Termites, and that's
cockroaches,
cockroaches, in the dark, right? Disgustingness. And that's what he did. And I mean, that's remarkable when you think about it. All of us have been struck, again, you're too young to really, I accumulated frustration for 35 years, starting in 80, that's when, excuse me, that's when I found out I was a conservative. Reagan was elected and I voted for Jimmy Carter. Please don't hold that against me. And I was like, wow, this Reagan's great. I got involved in politics. I found National Review, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and that was how I was weaned. And yet every year it just, nothing changed. It just kind of got, the progressive statists, liberal left just grew and grew and grew. And it's like, and the culture just got worse and more anti-Christian. There's a guy, a scholar named Aaron Renn. I don't know if you've heard of him. He for First Things, he wrote a piece. Have you heard of it? He wrote, it's okay, it's great. He called it there is a positive world for Christianity in America till probably 1990, and that's when Christianity was seen as a positive force in society. Then there was a neutral world, probably from Clintonish till Obama, where it's not good or bad, you know, it's okay. It's like one among many. It's pluralism and so that. And then after that, after Obama, it just became Christianity is a negative. It's a threat to civilization and everything that's good. And so that's where we are, where we were. Here's Trump, and here's this heathen in my brain coming down the escalator, all of a sudden taking over politics, and it's incredible. And yet he's creating what I believe in my book, I call it a great awakening, that something is being revealed here that's so profound. It isn't just politics, it isn't just policy. There's something rotting at the core of America spiritually that he has unexposed. And it's just so odd to say that because, that wasn't on my bingo card. Trump doing that, but it was in the exposing. And I love God's judgment because he forced the left. They couldn't help themselves after Biden won. And, they figured January 6th, all of MAGA is discredited, right? They're a bunch of insurrectionists. And of course, the Republicans go along with all of that. And again, remember this, none of what would have happened to Trump would have happened without the cooperation of Republicans. Everything, including Russia, the collusion and all that stuff. And then here we are, that they've vanquished him. And then he decides to come back. And, Springfield, Ohio was kind of probably the turning point. A lot of people agree with the derailment there. And they just kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it to the point where, he turns his head, tell me that's not God. Even non-religious people are going, I'm not religious, but wow, a millimeter and who knows what happens. And, so Elon Musk gives what, $100 million right after that, and so on and so forth. So I don't know if that answers your question, but this revealing, this exposing is happening, and people are seeing something that is so rotten in the world that had been bequeathed to us. And I go back in the book, in the Enlightenment and secularism and how we are literally at the other end of secularism. It's dead. It's gone. It's not even on life support anymore. Because that's how I say secularism promised everything and delivered nothing. And I think that's why it's more than it's just a political policy issue. It's actually God is doing something in people's souls here.
Yeah, it's
I could
interesting
go
to
on
think
for
about. I
hours
mean,
if you don't stop me.
it's not uncommon, biblically speaking, for God to use imperfect characters to
Oh,
accomplish his means.
mhm.
And with regard to what you just said, the way that Donald Trump, as an outsider, which is another theme, which is another
Mhm.
biblical theme,
Totally.
came in and exposed all of the rot, all of the corruption. I mean, that's really what he's done. He's put light on it. He's shed light on it. And it's almost like the only way that was possible was him being who he is. So
Totally.
we
That's why,
needed, we needed this
well, right.
imperfect,
People especially during his
rambunctious
first term,
character.
exactly. They would say, oh, I wish Trump wouldn't say that. I go like, he's Trump.
Yeah.
He is not going to change, you know? But that was a great point in the way you made it. It was exactly the kind of person it took. And he's a once in a many generations, phenomenon. Right.
Right. And it's interesting, you have the whole COVID situation. You have Trump gets elected unexpectedly. He becomes president. He didn't even expect to become president. He's talked about that. It
Right.
caught him by surprise. It's like, we didn't expect to win and we did. Um, he goes through 4 years of enduring hell from all of those people that you mentioned, all the people that hate him, all the people that have gotten rich and powerful off the backs of Americans. And fast forward, he then goes up in an election. COVID hits. He then goes up in an election against Joe Biden. He gets beat. We'll leave it at that. And then he's got 4 years of not being president, but he had 4 years to sit back and prepare and think about how he was going to approach this next presidency and how he was going to run a campaign. And he did it flawlessly and geniusly, which, has pretty much been the consensus when you evaluate what he just did from a campaign standpoint and now what he's doing from a transition standpoint. But it's just interesting, right? Because it's interesting just how you can kind of see Providence work throughout this
Oh,
whole process. As in, like, it's like, okay, 2020 comes through, and we are where we are from a country standpoint. But then God's like, you know what?
I'm
No,
not done with you yet.
I'm not done with you, but I'm gonna sit you out for 4 years because I would say I have bigger plans for you
Hmm.
in 4 years from now, right? And now we're in a situation where we have more rot, more corruption has been revealed, and we have a people that are growing increasingly tired of it. But
Hmm.
now what's most important is that he's in a position where he now has a team of people behind him,
Oh, totally.
and he's got a plan that has been thought about for the last 4 years. He has a transition team. This is the fastest a transition team has ever been
Ever.
hired in American history.
Right,
And
right.
they are coming in, they know exactly what they need to do.
Hmm.
And all along with that is America is becoming more Christian in the process, right? It's becoming friendlier to Christianity in the process. It's becoming cooler to be Christian in the process,
Imagine
right? You
that.
see Christian values
Imagine
popping up
that.
as being desirable again.
Right. Well, it's so interesting because I so I don't think I mentioned it yet, but after the election was compromised in 2020 and then January 6th, I was so low and depressed. I thought they won, it's over. And then I found Steve Bannon's War Room. And as I say, he talked me off the ledge into mixed metaphors. He got me out of the fetal position. I mean, I was that low because they got away with it. I mean, it's just amazing. And you figure, given I have 35 years now, by that time over 40 years of pessimism as a conservative, it's like that's it, you know, it's over. And yet Bannon was like, no, we can change. He preaches agency, right? That we can change things. And I'm ashamed to say I'm not sure I really believed that, you know, to a degree. As a Christian, of course, we can change things. That's why God brought us into this world to mold it and shape it and bless others by our service and so on. And and then all it takes is action, action, action. And so he would have Mike Lindell on there quite a bit, and they would both say, you know, it was God's providence that this all happened, that this election was allowed to he was allowed to lose it or whatever. And and then you couldn't see that, right? For a while, you're like, okay, I guess, you know, as things got crappier and worse, and you know, you're just going, man. And then slowly but surely, you begin to see, okay. And him turning his head was, of course, the final, like, that's God. I mean, even non-religious people are going, wow, I'm not religious, but man, you know, he never watched that slide at the beginning of those rallies. He just didn't, right? Then he says, bring up the slide. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you use the word providence, and you know what's so interesting in the book, I I talk about God's providence in the founding of America. And for a long time, so I have this picture, a painting up right over here in my office of Lincoln kneeling in the snow at Valley Forge, which was painted for the 1776 bicentennial of the Declaration. And my daughter and my wife got that for me when I turned 60 in July of 60 and 20. And if, you know, that was in the middle of COVID, and who knows what's going to happen in the election and all that. And I didn't realize at the time how profound that print painting would be to my life. Because every morning I get here, I read the Bible and I pray, and I would look up at that painting and I would go, God, you know, the founders, the only reason America was founded because of you, your providence. You were the one that allowed, even all the supposed deists said that, right? And and so it's the same thing with us. The odds against the founders were, I say, infinitely worse than ours against refounding America. I mean, it's just a fact. So
If
you
you
look at
read the
it,
writings of the founders, they credit the founding of the American nation to Providence. That is a
totally.
consistent theme in basically all of their writings.
And they meant the God of the Bible. It wasn't some esoteric,
Yeah.
you know, just like nature and nature's God to Jefferson. That was the God of the Bible, and they all knew it. And they all proclaimed it. And they believed that without Christianity, America would fail. Adam says that famously, right? Without a religious people, this ain't going to work, right? And we're seeing that, especially in microcosm in the blue cities. Isn't that true? You know, people are devoid of God. What do? Violence, and marriages are destroyed, and trash and homelessness and all that stuff. Yeah. How's that working for you? Life without God, which is all secularism means, by the way. It's persona non grata. And that's what America in this secular experience thought they could do. We'll just kind of, yeah, it's a personal thing. God has no say in actually how we run our country, right? And conservatives have bought into that, I hate to say. They
Yeah,
bought into this myth of
and
neutrality, as I call it.
yeah, and I want to touch on that because I think that that's critically important, and I think that this ultimately people have a hard time with this because they struggle to understand
So
what
true.
we are talking about when we're talking about God. We're talking about the fundamental source of reality. We're talking about the creator of all reality. So, this is what happens when you misalign yourself with God or with the principal source or fundamental source of reality.
Amen.
Naturally, you suffer the consequences of misalignment from reality, right? It's a basic example is like the reason that you don't lie, the reason that you don't tell a lie is because you are engaging in something that is not reality. You are participating in unreality when you lie. And when you do that, you suffer negative, miserable consequences. If you continue to, and your life becomes a lie, you then live in a delusion. And we all know that is
America 2024.
100%. You see
I
the
know.
chaos and the misery that ensues when you do that. You see that at the
Totally.
individual level, you see it at the societal level. So, when we're talking about God and we're talking about sin, we're talking about missing the mark or straying away from the fundamental reality that created all things, that created and ordered all things. You
Right.
are disordered when you're misaligned with it. You are ordered when you're aligned with it. And when it comes to individuals and society, and especially a nation with regard to America, this is why what we're talking about is critically important for us to remain one nation under God, or for America to remain a Christian nation, because the argument that we're making as Christians is that the best way to operate a country is by Christian values.
Amen. And I love your take on making reality the issue. I think I need to talk more about that. That's really, really good. Because in 2010, my son went to a classical Christian school. And until then, they'd gone to public schools. And ugh. Anyway, so we were blessed to do that. And my daughter had just started going to Hillsdale. And in 2012, she uh, basically minored in classical education. And the term, so I become an evangelist for classical education since then.
Well,
But
can I make a quick note because I think this hits on the theme that we're talking about. Look at a
good.
college like Hillsdale that
Oh,
is now thriving because of what they've remained aligned with, whereas look at all the other universities that are in chaos and misery because of what they've misaligned themselves from, or they've
great
aligned
point.
themselves with a false god, is what it comes
Great
down
point.
to.
Great point. And my daughter now um, works for the Barney Charter School initiative of Hillsdale. So I believe, I believe public education and government schools should be gone, but that's not going to happen overnight. So charter classical schools are a good way to introduce reality
Mm-hmm.
into, some of my Protestant Reformed Christian friends, they're like, oh, it's not biblical or whatever. It is. It's I love classical education because it's the true, the good, and the beautiful. And they presume and assume God. You can't have those things without God. So if kids are learning that, even if they're not getting the total religious underpinnings of that, anyway, we could talk for hours about that stuff. But so that's what's so encouraging. And the flourishing that I use the word flourishing a lot because I think that's what we need, right? Is we have secularism, which has been a total disaster. It's poverty stricken. It's a lie because there's no such thing as neutrality in government or in individual lives. So the flourishing comes from aligning with reality. I love that, which is in God, in Christ, in Scripture. ultimately. And even pointing people in that direction tangentially is going to help them kind of experience the blessings. So I interpret, uh, so I look back at the beginning of history, starting between Abram calling, God calling Abram out of Ur of the Chaldeans, right? So that's when history split into two. That was the fork in the road. You have on the one side, you have paganism, heathenism without God. That's all, life without God. And then you have God developing and making a people for himself. That's
Is,
it.
is it
That's
fair? Is it fair to say that paganism is another word for secularism? Is that
oh
the right
yeah.
way to think about it?
In fact, I'm sure in the book I talk about that being the case. It's a new form of paganism,
Sure.
and you can see the sacrifice of abortion. Rush Limbaugh always used to say that was you know, their sacrament, which is just anyway. And then what they're doing to children, mutilation and so on and so forth. So it's certainly a form of paganism, and that's the only choice we have. People think they can have like a sophisticated paganism. Yes, the Greeks were awesome and so on and so forth, but that was Christianity's influence on that is what turned it into what it is today. So that reality, just to get back to your point, is that we had talked about, I think, before we started recording, that young people are more attracted to Christianity and conservatism and so on today than ever, than any of the previous generations. And that's because of exactly what you're talking about. They want the real. Because you realize this, here's how we know secularism has failed. In America, 50,000 people a year kill themselves. 1.6 million try. How many other millions and millions are on antidepressants, right? Anti-anxiety meds, and so on and so forth. I mean, think about it. This is what a society without God, without Christian values, without pointing to the God of the Bible, that's what it got us. So young people, so when I raised my kid, I wrote a book called The Persuasive Christian Parent because I believed I could keep my children in the Christian faith. I could sell them on it. And one of the sections in my book, it's funny you say that, it's called The Real, because that's what children want. They want something's real. And so I would always use God's creation as the real, right? Here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to comport our lives to that thing that's actually there. So I love hearing you talk that way, because to me, that's going to sell, so to speak, to put it crassly.
Well, it's interesting that you use the word sell, but that's where I would say, I mean, you just talked about and you use those statistics to describe the misery that we are experiencing now in our modern times. People are struggling, people are suffering, people are miserable. And what the secular atheist philosophy, what that has delivered is it's left us defenseless
Mm.
and naked in the face of the malevolence, the evil,
Mm.
the adversity, whatever you want to call it, that
Right.
works against us in this world. So, and I think this is important to clarify. It's important to clarify that when it comes to flourishing and thriving, that does not mean that suffering, that you evade suffering forever
Totally.
from your
Totally.
life. But
Right.
what's important, I think, about what I think is critically important about what Christianity has to offer. And I say that I think this is the advantage that Christianity has in our current culture is that it gives you armor, it gives you defense, it gives you stability in the face of the suffering and misery that you will inevitably experience in this life. It gives you equipment in the face of hardship, and it gives you, I mean, I have the cross right behind me, and I keep it there for a reason because I believe it is the pursuit that you must make in your life. But what it does is it protects you in the storms, right? We use like that's a religious concept right there. But it gives you, it infuses your life with meaning despite the hardship, adversity, suffering that you're experiencing. So it doesn't leave you bare, it doesn't leave you naked.
What's
It,
even
it would be it's very difficult. And I feel for these people that go through suffering and hardship and they don't, and I consider many of the world victims to this secular ideology.
totally.
Um,
That's a
because
good way.
it's left them bare in the face of their suffering, and the numbers just prove what I'm saying here is right, and people are just lost and they don't know where to turn to. Um, and I believe that Christianity in general is there's a rekindling for it because people are searching for answers in the midst of the storms that they're in.
And what's so beautiful about Christianity and the faith is a verse that I've quoted to my children way too many times to count as they were growing up. In fact, still do, because life's still hard, is Romans 8:28. And Paul says that we know in all things God works for the good who love him, for those who are called according to his purpose. And I would joke with my kids, as they were growing up, and I would say, Paul certainly couldn't mean 100%, right? All. Maybe he meant 98. It's like, all. And think about, and this is something I've told them many times. Think about the purpose it gives your life when all things, God uses all of them for your good and his glory. So no matter what the show, excrement show looks like, right? It doesn't matter. First of all, we're going to live forever, right? So that's what we've always known and we know. So this isn't ultimately, this fallen world isn't it. We're looking for a new heavens and a new earth, this earth redeemed and renewed. But that's when he raises the dead. So in the meantime, we're bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, a la the Lord's Prayer. And in that, no matter what the circumstances are, and what you're saying is huge, because you're right. People are hungry. They want something. They want more. And God gives it to us in Christ. I mean, you talk about the cross, who would make up a religion where they say in the ancient world, take up your cross, take up it daily and follow me. So here's an torture, and the worst instrument of torture and death ever devised by sinful man. And Jesus says this is kind of the symbol. That's because we have to die to ourselves so that we can get out of ourselves and love others. Love God, love self, love others. So that's if you want the answers, it's there. And we just have to bring that out on a societal, cultural level, which is part of what this crazy internet thing's about. And then taking that into film and art and novels and you name it, into law, every area of life. That's what Christians need to do, because for too long, Christians have had their little secularism says we have our own little place at the table, right? Pluralism. And we'll just kind of, politely suggest maybe we could do this as a Christian or whatever. But no, that's not what God calls. He's saying he's Lord, he's king over the earth. And this is his. And now we're bringing his reign to everyone. And that's where true flourishing happens. It just does.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. When you had just mentioned kind of the culture and the arts, it made me think of everything that we go to visit when we travel, especially, us Americans, when we go to Europe, we go and visit all the buildings and the architecture, and then we go to see all the arts, and it's all God inspired, right?
Oh, yeah.
All the most beautiful, architecture and art that we've ever created. It's all God inspired.
God, right.
And since we stopped doing that, we stopped doing that. We took God out of the center of our culture, and look at what happened to us.
It's so interesting when, that you say that, because I bring everything. I hate to blame poor Rene Descartes. He was a pious Catholic guy, Frenchman. In 1637, sorry, he wrote Cogito ergo sum. So he wanted to find a foundation for all human knowing, epistemology. And I think, therefore I am. So that was the kind of the pivot point. Professional philosophers, historians say that was the beginning of modern philosophy. Well, now, if I, the human, am the starting point of all things, that's not going to work very well. So over time, metaphysics gets put to the side. The story of who God is and God starting with God. And then we'll just start with man. And then slowly but surely, all of the beauty you talk about just gets kind of, as the culture becomes more secular, right? As God gets more out to the periphery, then you get, modern art. you know, cubism and all that kind of stuff. And just when you look at buildings, in the early whatever, I don't know. I'm not a specialist or scholar on that kind of stuff, but it was Francis Schaeffer has done a lot of good stuff on that. That it's just
We can just leave
wow.
it at the time when they started becoming ugly.
Yeah, they did. Think about it. That there was just something. So yeah, the implications are everywhere.
Well, I think it just points back to the same theme that we've been talking about all along again, and why it's so critically important to keep your life as an individual aligned and under God, and why it's so critically important for a nation and for a society to remain under God is because we see it in the arts, we see it in the culture. As soon as you stray and you're aligned towards what is not God, what is the fundamental source of reality, and it's aligned towards something else, or it's misaligned from God or aligned toward another false God, idolatry, that
Right.
is precisely when it stops bearing good fruit.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's going to happen again in every area of life. And even so, it's interesting that Christians have had a difficult time navigating politics, um, because we've for so many years, because of this whole what's called the post World War II consensus, that whole idea that after the war we didn't want to get too religious and all that stuff because that creates tension and conflict, and we'll just be secular, and as if there was some neutral reality where none of this is going to really matter. And it just it Christians just kind of took a back seat and let other people see. For me, for most of my life, I was really involved in politics when I was in my 20s, early 20s, mid 20s. And then I just kind of like, if I just vote for the right people, it'll all turn out. And so it won't. We have to. So the American Republic is based on what's the first three words of our Constitution, right? We, the people. If it's going to be, it's up to us. So part of what I talk about in my book is that we need to see ourselves as, so for first of all, we're responsible for our families, right? Then we're responsible for our communities, and then our counties, and then our state, and then our federal government, right? It goes, and that's going to be required of Christians to bring our Christian faith as Christians. See, we're doing this for spiritual reasons. That's part of this kind of inherent dualism in so many Christians' minds, is we think, well, we're going to go out and do politics, and that's different. That's less spiritual. Well, that's no less spiritual than digging a ditch, right? Everything we do is unto the Lord, right? I mean, that's just everything you do, Paul says, unto the Lord, right? All your labor in the Lord is not in vain. And I always used to, because I thought this way, I thought that meant evangelism, pastoral work or something like that. No, all your labor in the Lord is everything that you do, because
Yes.
it's all in the Lord,
Yeah.
right? And that brings a profundity to what you do that is so significant and gives your life such meaning, because everyone's looking for meaning, purpose, and hope. And the secular world can't get it, can't give it. And so what we're talking about, it's a disaster. So that's why on a policy level and on a spiritual level, these things are happening concurrently. There's It's amazing. I do a chapter in the book, Christian, a theology of history and the providence of God. So we need to think about history theologically and see how God has done this throughout history. And I love it. I talk about St. Patrick and Alfred the Great and Magna Carta, and all the way through, the Glorious Revolution, the founding of America, the Puritans coming in the 1620s, 30s, 40s. And, the First Great Awakening was instrumental in the founding of America. There was this mentality of everybody that was just utterly Christian, right? This is how they saw the world, especially that man is fallen and corruptible, and we need a limited form of government, So it all has implications, and it has implications now if we would get involved and there are a lot. I mean, it's more than ever before. I mean, I think Christians are getting this, that we need to.
Yeah. I think what you just said there is critically important. There is no separating the different dynamics of life from fundamental reality. So
Mhm.
when you just said that you would, we have our religion, we go to church, and then we go into the world and we work. It's like, nope, that's not how it works. You are
Exactly.
living in reality, and everything that you do must be aligned with fundamental reality. That's why I feel like it's so important to talk about God in this way. And I've said this before, but
I like
when
it a
we're
lot.
talking about Christianity, we are talking about the universal way to live for human beings that produces human thriving, individual, all the way up to the
Right.
societal, national, civilizational level. And I
Amen.
compare it to the law of gravity. So, just as you should put your neighbor,
Mhm.
you should love your neighbor as yourself,
Right.
or consider the 10 commandments. Abiding by the 10 commandments or abiding by loving your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
This is the way that human beings were made to live aligned with reality. When you disobey those commandments or that law, it is the same thing as disobeying the law of gravity, right? The law of gravity is objective, it exists outside of me.
Whether you want it or not.
Myself with the law of gravity,
Right.
I will die. I will get hurt or I will die. The same is true with what we are talking about with regard to Christianity, is we are talking about
The
the
same law,
universal
right?
law of human behavior. Let's call it
Exactly.
that, right?
That's good.
And you violate it at your own risk. And there are consequences to doing so, right?
Mhm.
I think that's the way that I like to look at it.
Yeah, no, that's good because that's what people want is the real. That's just it. That's why this culturally, this is such a, you would think Donald Trump, gosh, to 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 be the instigator of a cultural transformation. I mean, you just can't make it up. You just, I love God has such a sense of humor. You talked about earlier how God uses unusual people, or the whole Bible is filled with people that are just, what is this guy doing there? Why would God use that person? You know, over and over and over and over and over, because I have a verse up on my board here, Zechariah 4:6, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord Almighty. And the point is that God will be glorified. He's the one that's going to get the credit. And so you look at Trump and you think it's God. I just don't know any other way to explain it, especially as it's all worked out to this day, right? Where we are is December 19th, 2024. This like, you look back and you go, my gosh. And that's why it's so important as the battle is just starting, right? I mean, the left and the Marxists are not giving up. The uniparty deep states, the globalists are not giving up. So we need to continue to affirm this reality-based definition of things, like you call it, right? We need to affirm that over and over and over. And part of that is in how we interpret in history, was America a Christian nation as it was founded? Of course it was. Mark David Hall writes a great book, I quote in my book. Yes, it was. And it wasn't founded like the Marxist 1619 Project, for instance, right? It just wasn't. That it's a horrible nation. It's fundamentally racist and misogynist and all that garbage. So these are things we have to keep affirming because the left isn't going to stop assaulting us, right? So that's why it's critically important to continue. That's why I love watching Bannon, because he's a warrior. We've got to keep fighting because they're not just going to roll over.
Right.
you know
So the a lot of pushback that I'll get from, call it opponents or people online is, how can you as a Christian support Donald Trump, who is a
Mhm.
felon, who has, not who is, treats people poorly. That's kind of the common critique that Christians get in support of Trump. So what would you say to that question? What do you think is a good argument back for them?
Well, he wasn't convicted of being a felon. It was whatever the actual case is, right? It was not that. So that's a lie. And I think
Right. He's
partly,
only a convicted felon if it goes to sentencing, which it never did. So for
right,
them to
right.
say he's a convicted felon is misinformation,
What is
everybody. Ha ha
that?
ha ha.
Was that what he sued Stephanopoulos for? Was it that, or I don't know if it was something else? But he got $16 million from ABC because of defamation. And they've been defaming Trump.
Stephanopoulos said that he was found liable for rape, and that
Uh,
was not true.
no,
Um, and Trump sued him for defamation, and ABC just paid him out $15 million for, what you can safely assume is obviously their mistake in that
yeah,
regard.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So So all of the lawfare against him is bogus. So if somebody's just going to say, "Oh yeah, Trump is this and that," then we're not having a conversation anymore. But for those who have a moral qualm about Trump, I that's a mistake because he, first of all, everyone that knows him says he's a great guy. He's nice. He's funny. He's genuine. He's Trump. He's a bizarre dude, right? Because he's just who he is. You don't become that by just being a normal person, quote unquote, right? So there's something about him. And, there's nobody that works with him that, all these people saying he hates women. Women are everywhere in his orbit. He hires them to do all kinds of things. So he's not that. So he's a genuinely decent guy, right? And he is not conservative enough for you and me, right? He just isn't on the LGBT stuff. And, I'm an abolitionist regarding abortion, right? I mean, it should be against the law because the rights of a baby should be the same as the rights of a baby who's 1 day old. But he's not there, but that's okay
I
because
agree.
he's
I consider abortion to me is worse than slavery, and we have a federal ban on slavery. We should have a federal ban on abortion. So yes, for you and me, Donald Trump falls short with regard to those policies.
to say the least,
He's too liberal as far as that goes.
way too liberal. And I pray most every morning when I pray that abortion, I pray it would be as unthinkable as slavery in America,
Yeah.
but it's worse than slavery. I say that to the Lord, right? It's just
Yeah.
it's murder.
Yeah.
So for that, and he's just homosexuals and all that stuff, and that's okay at this point in history because we're not, you know, abolitionists kind of maybe got us into the Civil War or contributed to it. So wanting utopia and having everything to be done right now is just, it's not going to work. That's not, to use our term for this little talk, is reality, right? It's hard and it's a battle if we're going to win. And Trump is the best one positioned at this point. I mean, think about the judges he'll appoint. They will be conservative. And in fact, they'll probably be better than before because now the conservative movement, the Federalist guys are actually more on top of, hey, we don't want a wolf in sheep's clothing this time, right? We want somebody who's full on pro-life, right? Just like the left does. We want a pro-death judge, right? So in so many ways, he is going to be better for the entire movement. And then you have eloquent MAGA like J.D. Vance, Catholic, right? Pro-life. So, and he's had to play the political game about certain things or whatever. That's okay, right? Because we know these guys are ultimately on our side, and the entire movement of true conservatives, right, who are Christian or even conservative Jews, that we believe this. So, and Trump is your best guy to do that. It just is at this point, obviously, given the alternatives.
Yeah, yeah. I actually think that going to his family and the people that are closest to him, the people that have worked with him, his close friends. You
Right.
see, Dana White has come out and said a lot of admirable things about Trump. I mean, honestly, hearing about Trump's work ethic, for me as someone who is entrepreneurial minded, hearing someone who has
Insane.
like the motor like Trump is inspiring to me. But
Incredible.
yeah, I mean, the only people that call him a racist or a misogynist seem to be his political opponents
Correct.
or the media who absolutely hate his guts.
Who
But
have no credibility.
when you have who have shredded their
Zero.
own credibility, especially here over the last few years.
Right.
But when you look at his family, I mean, obviously he has sons and daughters who are both, as you said before, well adjusted to society. All have seem to have, by anyone's standards, good heads on their shoulders.
Totally.
Um, he has people that work for him. He has a massive organization and plenty of women and, people of all different colors, I guess you can say, all
Hmm.
work for him and have
Right.
no issues with him whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, I actually think that speaks to a man more so than what anything else does. I mean,
Totally.
what your family
Oh,
and your closest friends and
right.
coworkers have to say about
For
you.
me, in legal terms, that was dispositive,
Hmm.
which means that's ultimate. When you look at this family, and yeah, he's divorced, whatever. But when you look at his kids, I mean, and then during the convention, after he had the thing on his ear, and his grandkids are running up to him, humanizing the guy. That's
Yeah.
who he actually is.
Yeah.
You know, he's this bombastic. He grew up in and developed his professional chops in New York City real estate, dealing with unions and tough guys and all this kind of stuff. And everything is legal, suing everybody, all of this stuff. So he became a caricature of himself, if you will, right? He became Trump, right? And he was on that kind of thing that turned maybe you and me off as conservative Christians, but we didn't know underneath what was there. I heard Larry Arnn. In fact, I listen to often the Hugh Hewitt Hillsdale College Hour, which is every Friday. And he was saying, I was no fan of Trump initially. And now you just listen to him talk about Trump. I mean, the respect that Arnn, who is one of my most respected people in the world, how much he respects Trump now, it's amazing. And he opened my mind to Trump in the first place, too. Larry Arnn's taking Trump seriously. I'm going, hmm,
I've
hmm.
grown to, is he the president of Hillsdale? Is that
Yes, I'm
who?
sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
I
that's
assume
okay.
everybody
I've
knows
actually
that.
I've grown to really like him, and I watched the Jordan Peterson Exodus series and now the Gospels, and he's in it, and I think that
I gotta check that
whenever
out.
he opens his mouth, he always has very good things to say. I really
He is
enjoy his
so
perspective
wise.
and comments on things.
Yeah, and what's especially amazing to me is, he's an Aristotle scholar. I mean,
Hmm.
and he could probably recite the Nicomachean Ethics, which is very hard to understand. I've read it. It's like, oof. But man, he's just got this kind of simple, homespun, profound wisdom,
Hmm.
which in a way, Trump, he has from a more intellectual side. Trump has it just from a homespun, down to earth side. Now, let me give you a good example of that, which is how funny wisdom is. Talking about reality and flourishing, because I really love I love this reality take on things and flourishing. So I'm going to steal that from you. Um, but but
Well, you're
my
not stealing
mother,
anything from me. It's
I
objective
know,
reality. It exists
that's true.
regardless of
That's
what I
true.
have to say about it.
I just had to be reminded. I just had to be reminded. So, in my first book, it's called The Persuasive Christian Parent, as I mentioned. So I talk about how so I'm Italian. Di Virgilio is kind of Italian. So 100% too, Sicilian mostly. And my grandfather came over from this little island to Boston, and then in 1927 he moved to Downey, California, Montebello actually. But my mother was born in Downey, and when she was growing up, my grandfather would say, "Now, when you go to town, and if you're a rotten little girl, people won't say you're a rotten little girl. They'll say, 'What rotten parents you have.'" And my mother, and I think that's old school wisdom. My mother used that on me a lot growing up, and it had such an impact that now when I see, like, I'm just meeting you today, I can promise you probably have great parents, you know, because apples fruit just doesn't fall that far from the tree. I mean, there's exceptions to rules, right? But it just doesn't happen a whole lot. And that's a wisdom about reality that when I learned, because of my grandfather, right? Because of coming through my mother, learning that about Trump and his kids, that's it. Okay, I'm at least open to the guy now. He still rubs me the wrong way.
Hmm.
He's still Trump, but and now I've kind of he's endeared himself to me in my family over the years that you just kind of it's just Trump, It's just great.
Yeah,
So,
and that's interesting that you say that. I mean, I was on the same. I was kind of on the same boat. I did vote for Trump in 2016. I was
mhm,
excited about the change in government. I was excited about the outsider. I did not want Hillary Clinton to be president, so I
mhm,
voted for Trump. I was very happy and proud when Trump won. I felt as though kind of Americans stood up and were like,
mhm,
"No, we don't want any more of this." Kind of it was kind of like a mini what it was in 2024. Like we rejected the leftist ideology. We were kind of tired
right.
of these bureaucrats running things. So we elected an outsider. Kind of the established Republicans, we wanted them out. So I
Right.
thought that we did a good job taking kind of an initial stand there.
Mhm.
Um, they obviously began to put things into place to get Trump out in 2020. But early on in this election cycle, I was not necessarily big on Trump. I didn't want Trump to necessarily run again. I didn't want him to be the candidate. I like
Interesting.
Glenn Youngkin, who's my own
Right, right.
Virginia governor, who proved the path to victory in the
Mhm.
state of Virginia that I did not think Trump was capable of. And
Interesting.
interestingly, when Youngkin won Virginia, he actually distanced himself from Trump and
I know.
the whole election all the election
Denial.
talking points he backed away from. He kind of went, a little bit more moderate, but kind of like, but
Right.
still conservative. Um, and he won. He flipped the blue state red, which I thought was huge. And then the other model that I looked to for that was DeSantis and what he did down in Florida. So actually, early in the election cycle, I really liked DeSantis. I was like, I want this guy to be president. I think what he's done in Florida has been, I mean, he turned
Mm.
it from Florida used to be a
Oh,
purple state, and
when we
now
moved
and
when we moved here, just to
it's
tell you,
landslide red, right?
this is so
So
heavy. When we moved here, there were 560,000 more Democrats registered. Today, there's 1.2 million more Republicans.
yeah, I mean, so and that speaks to the point. I just really thought that we had other people who gave us a
Right,
better shot to win, and
right.
I wanted to win. What happened was things started to occur where you just had this enemy, this kind of almost, I mean, malevolent force that began to really turn on and target Trump. And it got to the point where I was like, oh my gosh, like if all of these people that have ruined the government, that have gotten rich and powerful off our backs, that lie to us constantly, if they hate Trump, then you know what? Maybe I should pay attention to this guy. And then the assassination attempts happened. Then he started to build this team around himself with RFK Jr., Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, like all of these, Vivek Ramaswamy, all of these highly competent, accomplished leaders in other aspects of life where I was just like, you know what? I think I'm all in on this. Um,
That's great. That's
and I
great.
think, but again, I don't think that was just me. I think that, God's providence
No,
was at work within all of that as well.
absolutely. In fact, on so I just started because I'm just a guy sitting here in an office in Florida. I live near Tampa, and so I don't get out much. So earlier this year, and I wanted to promote my work more in my books and all that. So I got involved on Twitter, and and I've kind of enjoyed that actually. But it was such a trip during the election to be engaged in this community of people. And you have the never Trump, I mean, the people who I won't vote for Trump, he's not pro-life enough. And then you would have, which were frustrating and anyway, and in one way. And then you had the DeSantis people. And if you had just, you had just picked DeSantis, and then Trump, DeSantis would be killing it by now, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, oh, people, come on.
DeSantis
It
didn't
was
have DeSantis didn't have what it took to overcome the Trump factor.
correct.
He wasn't strong enough in that regard. Maybe he'll develop it. I don't know.
Right.
Like maybe he
But
just had to
also
go through
history,
that and he's
right.
had to,
History was against him. I mean,
yeah,
the events, right?
yeah.
Because I think it was on War Room the other day that somebody came on and talked about how Springfield, Ohio, or maybe it was on Charlie Kirk show, um, Springfield, Ohio, and him visiting after the train derailment was like the thing. Nobody thought, this is he's over, now and got to move on from Trump and so on. And then that happened, and then that started to, maybe Trump's going, okay, I can do this, and then and of course that spooks the deep state. What was it in July of, August 8th? That's my dad's birthday. The reason I remember it of 23 when they raided Mar-a-Lago.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That that was another thing that people just said, what?
Yeah. The lawfare being used against them was
And then
yeah,
that
the
just, of
train
course, they
derailment,
just
then the
ramped that up.
lawfare. Yeah. That the lawfare was like, oh my gosh, like if they're going after this guy and they're attacking him like this, then
In
uh,
four different places, and it's just
yeah.
all it's all a joke, and everybody's just like, okay. So that's why nobody else had a chance at that point. It was just
It became a true movement at that point, and
that's a good way to
and
put it.
Trump became the hero that was fighting against the deep
Right.
state on behalf of all of us.
Full on.
Yeah.
It just gives me the chills when you say it that way because again, I'm a boomer, much maligned. for 40, what, almost 44 years of dealing with this persistent low grade pessimism as a conservative. And then that's why when I wrote this book, I was optimistic. I believed this could happen because I believe God was actually doing this, that he was using Trump to develop this great awakening in people, spiritually and otherwise. And health, I've heard you have somebody on here talking about health, a doctor, which was great.
Yes.
And then the refounding of America was a true possibility. But deep down, that inner pessimist of me, it's just like, could this, I mean, wow. And then the bullet, and and then after that, I just think it was a foregone conclusion. I didn't even stay up the full night of the election because she was so bad. She was just so horrendously bad that there was no way. And you just knew. You see Charlie Kirk I'm sure you saw it on college campuses. He would go on the campuses and he would be getting thousands of kids, where in the past he'd get a few hundred, throwing out MAGA hats and so on and so forth, and talking about the young generation and how they're getting things now. So yeah, so it's actually, we're actually have a chance to refound America. And that seems impossible to me because, again, 40 plus years of just seeing constant retreat in the face of the uniparty of the left and so on. So it's thrilling. It really is.
Elaborate on what you just said there a little bit. So, refound America. What do you
Right.
mean by that?
Huh. So I write a chapter about in the book about refounding America, because we have to look at first how America was founded, first of all, as and it's so important to look at the Christianity and um, all of the cultural movements and influences that came to make this incredibly unique thing happen. And it would not have happened without, I have a book that I wanted to keep here. Uh, I don't know if you've ever read it. It's called A Patriot's History of the United States.
No, I have not read that. Who is that by? And
It's by
we can
Larry
put a note for
Schweikert.
that.
Great. Larry Schweikert and Michael Allen. And it's, so there's this History of America by Howard Zinn that was published in 1980 that is called A People's History, which is, of course, the way a communist would call a book, right? A People's History of America. And it's all of the woke, oppressive, DEI, critical theory perception of American history. That was put into public schools. And so that's why part of my book, I say there's a debate about how we define America's past. Because if we do want to refound, that's why the title of the book is Going Back to Find the Way Forward, right? We have to know where we came from. So this book, reading it was so powerful because he talks about how every stream of the United Kingdom, the peoples from the United Kingdom came to America with their own cultures and mores and personalities and religion, right? And like you have the Congregationalists in the north, you have the Episcopalians in the south, you have the Presbyterians in the central states. And each one of these and how they looked at life kind of meld together to become America. It's stunningly fascinating. And you have to know that how important Christianity was to all of this, to give us a nation conceived, as Lincoln said, in liberty, and what true liberty is. Because as Americans, we believe that liberty equals choice. And nothing could be further from the truth. Liberty includes choice, but that's a small, small portion of what liberty truly is, because it's living in a way that you are worthy of self-government, right? People call it ordered liberty, which is really a redundancy, because liberty should be ordered to be defined as liberty. So to refound America in the future, we'll never capture what America was then, because there will be no first great awakening. There will be no of these peoples coming and bringing their cultures to a wilderness. It was amazing because they had to come here and fend for themselves. So what does that build in the American character, right? Self-reliance. That's why we are different than Europe, because they didn't have that in their genes, if you will, right? We as Americans have that. That's part of the reason that Americans just get a little ticked off, even to this day, as degraded as we've become as a people, still get ticked off of being told what to do. It's just like we're self-reliant, we're Americans, pull yourself by your own bootstraps and all that kind of stuff. And that's diametrically opposed to the Marxist version of history, right? Everything, it couldn't be more upside down. So capturing something of that in our Christian faith has to happen for the refounding of America, back to the constitutional principles of limited government, because what? We all believe we're fallen, right? Man is fallen and we do not trust him with power. So I talk a lot about Babel. I think I used the word Babel like 39 times in the book. And the concentration of power, wherever it is found, is evil. I think that's so critical. The concentration of power is evil. You see that in the medical profession. You have the AMA and you have all of this stuff happening from the top down, determining everything about how medicine is. I could get off on that, but I don't want to. But the point is that this concentration of power is something that we need to get back to, right? Because in progressivism, and I talk about all this history in the book, but progressivism and the rule by experts, and you have the growing scientific management. Woodrow Wilson wrote about this in the 1800s. And all of that's happening to make the modern America what it is today. And we got to push back and go back to liberty and limited government, right? And it means more at the local level. That means federalism becomes more robust and we become more sovereign states, speaking like a libertarian almost. We're a sovereign states, right? We agreed to put the United States together. They do not rule us. That's the kind of mentality we have to start building back in through our education, homeschooling. I don't know if you homeschool your kids or classical, whatever, but we need to teach them this kind of stuff, right? And that's how, and this is going to take time. We're not going to overcome Leviathan, just kind of stick in one, we're not like Ahab, sticking one whale harpoon into the whale. This is going to take many to bring it down. And it's going to take time. So, that's maybe a more amorphous answer to your question. I mean, we need to get back to the rule of law and so on and so forth. The details, legislation, and actually getting rid of the administrative state. I talk a lot about that in the book because I never even really heard the term administrative state until studying for the book, and until the later part of Trump's, appearance on the political stage. And we need to get rid of that. Right? We need to have Congress actually be accountable for the laws they pass again. So there's many directions you could take this. This is cultural as well as political policy wise. And we just have the chance to do that now because limited government has now become maybe something that people are open to. You can take care of yourself.
Yeah. When you gave that correct definition of liberty, what it made me think of was not the ability to do whatever you want, right?
Mm.
It's Saint Pope John Paul II has a phenomenal quote. It's like, free will is not the right to do what you want. It's the right to do what you ought, right? So I think that's really good there. But what it also reminds me of is, it reminds me of the story of Exodus when the Israelites were under the tyranny of Egypt. And the famous line from the book of Exodus is, Moses went to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go."
Mm-hmm.
And we usually stop it there, but the whole line is, Moses went to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go so that they can worship me in the desert," right? So let them be free so that they can worship what is right, what is proper, right? So I think that's a more accurate I mean, it's obviously a more Christian way to look at what liberty actually is, right?
Right.
What I also want you to do, though, because you mentioned it, can you explain a little bit more that metaphor for Babel? So can you explain what Babel is and then explain
Sure.
why it's relevant now?
Right. That's an important question and thing to clarify. So in chapter 11, after the flood, and then you have the people basically in assumes one language, building this huge tower, Babel. And they were building it up to heaven. And God said, if I don't stop them, nothing they do will be impossible for them. So he scattered them, scattered their languages. So all the different languages were created. So they couldn't communicate as one man to create something that would basically challenge God. And so that takes us back to the fall, Genesis 3, where Satan's temptation to Eve was, you will be like God, knowing good and evil, if you just disobey God. And so Babel is kind of the communal way that humanity said, we're going to be like God without God, right? Who needs God? And there's no indication in the text that God, Yahweh the Lord, anywhere part of this building, right? It was just man wanted to be great. He found something, he's going to do it. The heck with God. And so that dispersion, to me, it's the contrast, right? The concentration of power versus the dispersion. Right? And when power is concentrated, it will see. Who was it? Power corrupts. Lord Acton, right? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that axiom, I change it a little bit because all people are sinners, and all people tend to corrupt power, regardless. So no one can be trusted with absolute power. So the more power you have, the more power someone has, we have to tamp down the power, if you will. And so that's what Babel is a metaphor for. We just, the globalist elite were such a powerful example of the tyranny that comes from this kind of concentration of power. I mean, it was just when you saw COVID and you lived through it and you see the whole world agreeing as one to stifle humanity and everything they do, you're just like, whoa, this is not good, right? And so to me, that allows people to go, well, if it's not good on a global level, is it good on a federal level? This concentration of power, is it good on a corporate? I'm a conservative, I'm a free trader. Corporations, right? Maybe not. Maybe corporations can be bad, right? Because they concentrate power, and look at the power they have, and then what they do to the federal government in terms of printing money, or what they do to big pharma, and so on and so forth. So the concentration of power is something that as we're refounding the country, especially your generation and generations after you, that we need to tamp down the concentration of power wherever it's found. And how you do that, I don't know. I mean, the thing is that we have to understand the big picture. I'm a puzzle guy, and the puzzle pieces we'll figure out how they fit in later. That's kind of okay. Let's get the big picture, and now we'll get the particulars and how we actually make that fit. But the principle, the founders knew that, right? They were no way. They were just the federal. In essence, the Federalists got it wrong. Right? They were just like, we need a powerful central government. Well, yeah, we did at the time. The Articles of Confederation wasn't working, and yeah, but you see where it went, right? Where does it take something? So we got to get back to a more of an Article Confederation-y view of the states as sovereign, right? And then get sovereignty down to the local level. I mean, we need to run we're involved in our local GOP here in our county, and it's fascinating to see how county government is run. And it's up to us, right? It's up to the people who live here, right? But our mindset is like, well, it's all going to be taken care of for us. No. So hopefully in the generations to come, we will build a more activist people who understand that self-government is a responsibility, right? I mean, that's what this is all about. We have this responsibility to govern ourselves, and we've been given this vehicle to do it, and we better take that seriously. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, a couple different things are coming to mind. I know that Jordan Peterson, he just did that ARC conference, which centered on the principle of subsidiarity, which is, as you progress up the the power scale, I guess you can say, it needs to become limited and limited and limited as you work your way up, right? So the federal
Right.
government should actually have the
Most
should be
limits.
most limited, right?
Right,
Whereas
right.
as you work your way down the power structure, and I think Ben Shapiro talks about this a lot, and I really like the way that he talks about this, is that
I got to check that out. That's good.
I'm a tyrant of my family. No, I'm just like, I'm,
Benign dictator.
but you know what I mean? Like there are rules that
Absolutely.
that my wife and I have set for our family that are more stringent on societal laws, right? Like we are going
Absolutely.
to practice this religion. You are going to eat this way. Like, the state government is not going to tell me
No.
obviously what religion I practice or what I'm going to eat for dinner, but I tell my kids what we're going to do while they live under my house. So the the rights that my kids have are more limited within our household.
Indeed.
Um, but and then as you work your way up, you have your local neighborhood, you have your local, or say even call like your church community, and then you have your state, and then you have your federal government. It's supposed to get um, more limited as you work your way up. So yeah, that's interesting that you said so that, and that's the proper structure. Like that's the
Yeah.
correct structure.
Right.
With at least when it comes to the constitutional republic that we live in, which is America. A lot of people get that wrong. They call us a democracy. You
Uh,
have the left that's trying to
no.
abolish the electoral college because they think the popular vote
Right.
should be a pure democracy is what they think that we should have when they again these lawmakers in our government don't have the wherewithal to realize that the founders created something to protect us from
From
pure
democracy.
democracy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um,
Because democracy will get you tyranny every time. That's why the left
correct.
likes it, right?
Correct.
It's
And they knew that because of examples throughout history.
of course.
Which
That's what's
maybe the
so
left does know that. Maybe they do know that, and that's the point, and that's what they want, right? So
they
that's
do. They're
right.
Marxists through and through. And I talk a lot about that in the book because Marx is the foundation, of the left. I mean,
Yeah.
everything he wants to abolish, the family, the nation state, private property, religion, Christianity, that's what the left wants. It's exactly what Marx put in the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah.
That's the left we battle.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think and then what we just talked about there with regard to liberty and what liberty truly is. And, one of the things that you know, I'm in a fight here online and in my life to do what I can to keep America one nation under God and to hopefully influence as many people as I possibly can that the cross, that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And I've
Mhm.
talked about how that's an alignment with reality, which gives your life meaning and is the best path that you can possibly think of in this world toward fulfillment, flourishing, thriving, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Um,
And that's appealing. That is really appealing to people.
and it's becoming more and more appealing, especially as more and more people, realize the
Right.
emptiness that the secular culture has delivered for us. All the
Right.
secular promises have turned up empty.
That's why all this is his. I can't think of the word I'm using, but it's all come together in a way that's remarkable because secularism had to play itself out. It just had to because
Yeah,
it promised something, right? It said, okay, here's what secularism is. We can have this neutral space and religions we don't have to kill each other because of religion and so on and so forth. And then Trump and then the woke left and then all of it just kind of boom. And that's why we have a great awakening. I mean, you
yeah.
know, that
It's
is
it,
happening and we
it,
just need
it,
to build on it.
yeah. It's a great awakening, but it's also critical for the success of America, and I believe this because I forget what founder said it. I think it might have been John Adams, but I think he said that um, America's not possible without a moral people.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. Exactly what he said.
we have to be we have to be oriented toward God in order for America to work because we can only have liberty. We can only be a people that are worthy of self-government if we handle ourselves in a way that doesn't require the government to handle us, right? So,
That's
and the only way to
totally,
do that is
totally.
to be a moral,
Totally.
God-oriented people. So, this is why when we say that America must be Christian again, or why we say that it's so important to be Christian, like we're not saying this just because we're I'm not saying this because I want you necessarily to get your butt in the pew at church on Sunday just so it can make me feel good. I'm saying this because ultimately when it comes down to it, I hope that I have the courage, but when I say this, like, because I'm willing to die for the fact that this is the actual truth about reality and the way that human life and the world works,
Amen.
right? So, and I think it's that important. It's that critical. And if we want to live in a country, if we want to live in a nation where we have freedom of vocation and we have the right to worship the God that we have the right to worship God and we have the right to debate about what God is and about the best way to worship God, right? Like all of these things are good. Like we can get caught up in the theology and the different philosophies and all of that. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, the fact that, I'm a Catholic, you're not Catholic, but we can sit here and we can talk about these truths and then we can also debate on perhaps even the best way to worship God. And that's all good, at least in my
Right.
opinion, right? But the
Absolutely.
fact that we only get to do that because we live in a country that allows us to do that, and that has not been the case throughout human history. And how fortunate and blessed we are to live in a country that allows us to pursue the work that God made us to do, that allows us to pursue God really at all, and allows us to build families and build lives without the government dictating what we can and can't do. And
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, that is something that is very much worth fighting for in
Amen.
the culture and the political sphere and the online
Right.
sphere, wherever I have the chance to. I'll
Wherever
be
God gives us,
talking about
exactly.
those things. Right.
That's great. That's great. And that's where may your tribe increase, man. You're a young man. Because again, to be a boomer and to see back how my generation, much of it just ruined everything, as some people think, but just how it all kind of worked out through the sexual revolution and the 60s, and then, on and on and on. And then now we're here. And this next generation's coming up. It's the most encouraging thing in my life that's happened, just to see what's happening, and part of that, and kids younger than it's amazing what's happening. So
Yeah, I'm
a lot,
excited for it. I really
lot to
believe
build
that
on.
there is. I really
Really
believe
a lot
God
to
is at
build on.
work, and I think that something big is happening and continuing to happen, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, Mike. So thanks for joining me today, and tell
You bet.
people where they can find your work and where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is just my name. So I'm sure Zach will link to it, but
I'll put a
Mike
link down in for it.
DiVirgilio.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. MikeDiVirgilio.com. And my books are there. And the latest book is Going Back to Find the Way Forward. So where the inspiration for this conversation came from. And then I also I got involved on Twitter earlier this year, and I guess I made a little whatever. And someone from a a YouTube channel called Eschatology Matters, invited me to start a podcast called The Based Boomer Podcast, which I love it. It's so pretentious. And I'm not the only based boomer, by the way. there's quite a few of us. And so the Based Boomer Podcast. So I'm on there, and that's wonderful because again, get to share and everything we talked about today is I get to do that there. So yeah, so that's it.
That's great. Well, I'll put all the links down
Thank
for all those
you.
places in the description of this episode. But yeah, Mike. Well,
Thanks.
thanks again. I really enjoyed our conversation, and
Me too, man. Me too, a
hopefully we'll talk
lot.
again soon.
Great, great. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, Mike. We'll end it there. Um, I appreciate that. I thought that was a good conversation, and hopefully
Good.
people can get something from that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think again, just put it out. And God does amazing things. We'll never know, right? We just see it, and it's just, he's so God.
Yeah.
It's just so ridiculous how God is, because our little brains try to wrap our mind around this. At times I just become a total charismatic, just like uh, God's greatness. It just blows your mind, and that's what He wants, right? Him. That's how great He is, and then allows you, if you get that part, everything else, I'll give you all this other stuff.
Yeah.
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 Don't
Yeah. We
worship
just
it.
do the little teeny tiny things like, have this conversation, try to remain in truth as best as
Exactly.
possible. And then just,
Raise
put
our
it.
family. You have 5 kids. It's so awesome. I'm so proud of you. That's so
Yeah.
wonderful.
Thank you.
No, really,
Thank you.
that's just, I love that. And there's nothing better than raising children. It's my favorite thing in the world to do.
Yeah. It's,
How old
I
are your
come
kids, by
from,
the way?
what'd you say?
How old are your kids?
My oldest is 10, so he'll be 11 in June, but at 10 basically all the way down to 2.
That's awesome.
My youngest is just under 2. So
That's awesome.
it's funny, my oldest has a big personality. And I guess all of my kids have equally large personalities, but my wife and
That's
I,
good.
so we had, not to divulge too much information, but we had a miscarriage after our fourth. And
Okay.
my wife didn't want to have her last experience of pregnancy be a miscarriage. So
No kidding.
so we went for our fifth, and you have no clue, right, how things are going to turn out. So she's like,
No,
yeah, she's like, it'll be a boy. So she knew that she knew she was going to have a boy, and she was like, we're going to name it Jude, and we're going to name him Jude, and
no
he's going to
kidding.
be a really easy baby.
Ah,
So two of
right.
those three things came true. We had a boy, he's named Jude, but he is a wild man, and he is like
That's great.
the driver. He's got a heck of a personality, but he cracks us up,
That's
and
great. That's great.
yeah, he's got just tons of energy. So yeah, our whole family like feels his energy because
That's
because he's
great.
so crazy. But no,
Kids are
I
the
come from
great
a
one.
big family. I'm one of
Do you?
6, so I'm used to it. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
I enjoy it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like being around people. I like talk. I'm an extrovert, so
It's so
we love
special.
it. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
really enjoying it.
God uses it to sanctify us. It's just so incredible how He does that.
Oh,
He
there's
uses
no
our
question
kids.
about it. There's no question about it. I mean, the who you become when you have a family and when you have a marriage and you have kids to that you're responsible for. You become a I don't I mean you
Who
become a
God
better
wants you to
person, I
be.
think puts it
Yeah.
lightly, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Who God wants you to be. So
Yeah.
it's all Him.
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
Him. Okay, brother.
Thank you, Mike.
Really
Great
appreciate
talking
it.
to you. And so
And I'll keep a lookout for this.
I'm gonna get these files up and I'm gonna get them over to my editor Sam, so he can
Okay.
start putting everything together, and then I'll come up with an intro video that kind of introduces our conversation, and I should be able to have this up. I mean, we work pretty quick. Probably have it up by tomorrow if we get
Wow.
rolling. So,
Okay, great.
but
Okay,
I
well, I'll
enjoyed the
pass it on.
conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I
Thanks
did
for
too.
bearing with me on schedule and
Oh,
all that
you
good
bet.
stuff. And
You bet. I
yep.
appreciate your work. Keep it up.
Thank you,
Keep it up,
Mike.
man.
Sounds good.
You bet.
Be in
Okay,
touch
take
soon.
care.
Thanks.